Millionaire tracked his maid after work. What he found changed his life forever. William Harrison's mansion was quiet, the air thick with the anticipation of something he never saw coming. The real estate mogul, a 62-year-old titan of industry, had built his empire on control, manipulation, and ruthless business tactics. But none of his business deals, none of the power or influence he had accumulated over the years, could have prepared him for the moment that was about to change everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary day? He had been living with his maid, Diana Thompson, a 35-year-old black woman, for months now. Diana had worked for him for 8 months, and in that time, William had come to see her as just another part of his household. He had never suspected her of anything other than fulfilling her duties as expected. But that day something felt off. A missing diamond bracelet had set the stage for an encounter that would dismantle everything he thought he knew about his own life and the people he considered beneath him. "Diana, I need you to empty your pockets." William's voice broke the silence in the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. Diana, her hands still drying on the dish towel, slowly turned to face him. Instead of the fear he was expecting, he saw a strange, unsettling calm in her eyes, a tranquility that suggested she was prepared for whatever was coming. Her eyes met his and she spoke. "Is there a problem, Mr. Harrison?" There was no panic in her voice, no sign of guilt or fear. It was as if she had anticipated this moment, as if she knew this day would come. William's unease grew, but he pressed on. "My wife says a diamond bracelet is missing," William stated, his tone sharp. "A $15,000 bracelet. It was in her bedroom, and you were the only person cleaning in there today." Diana nodded slowly, her expression neutral, as if processing information that she already knew. But she didn't flinch, not even for a second. Instead, she continued folding the dish towel with the same deliberate precision as before. "And you automatically thought of me?" she asked, her voice steady and calm, but there was something sharp in her words. Something that William had never heard from her before. It was the tone of someone who was not just accepting an accusation but was questioning it, challenging it. William's eyes narrowed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he continued, his voice growing colder, the arrogance creeping into his words. "I know you have a daughter to support. I know things are tough. Maybe you just got confused about what was yours." His words were meant to belittle her, to reduce her to a position where she felt she had no choice but to admit guilt. He had done it with dozens of employees before, especially black employees. They were easily intimidated, easily made to leave quietly when the accusations were leveled at them. But Diana didn't react the way William expected. She didn't shrink. She didn't look at him with fear or apology. Instead, she did something that caught him completely off guard. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of submission, nor was it a nervous grin. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've just realized something, when they've seen through a facade they've long suspected. It was a smile that sent chills down William's spine. "Mr. Harrison," she said, pulling out her phone from her pocket with deliberate slowness. "Before you empty my pockets, how about we call the police? I'm sure they'd love to investigate a $15,000 theft." William froze. This was not the reaction he had expected. Diana wasn't pleading, she wasn't apologizing. Instead, she was offering to involve the authorities, her calmness betraying an unsettling confidence. "Are you sure you want to go down that road?" William said, his voice faltering just a bit. "If you cooperate, this will be easier for both of us." Diana didn't hesitate, she didn't even blink. "Oh, but I insist," she replied. "I've been working here for 8 months now. I've been listening, observing. I think the police might be interested in some of the things I've noticed." She locked eyes with him as she said this, making it clear that she was no ordinary maid. William's mind raced. He had always seen Diana as just another part of his household, someone who existed to clean and maintain his home. He had never imagined she would be able to turn the tables on him. But now, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was in control of this situation. Diana's phone vibrated, and she glanced at the screen. Her smile widened, almost in amusement. "Ah, perfect timing," she murmured under her breath. She quickly typed something in response, then looked up at William. "Looks like I'm going to have visitors earlier than expected tonight." William watched her, confused and uneasy. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he was losing his grip on the situation. Diana continued to empty her pockets with slow, methodical movements. There were keys, a pack of gum, a crumpled tissue, but no diamond bracelet. No evidence of theft. She held out her empty hands toward him. "Satisfied?" she asked calmly. But with a challenge in her voice, before William could respond, the doorbell rang. And then it rang again, and again. The sound echoed through the house like an ominous warning. The insistent ringing grew louder, more pressing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," Diana said as she walked toward the door, her steps confident and unwavering. "But I have a feeling our conversation is just getting started." William stood still, watching her. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own arrogance beginning to crumble. He had always thought he was the one in control. He had always believed that his money, his power, his status would protect him from anything. But now, as he watched Diana walk toward the door, he realized something had shifted. Diana opened the door, and William could hear the voices, several of them speaking both English and Spanish, coming from the hallway. William's heart began to race as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He didn't recognize the voices, and he didn't know how they had gained access to his home, but Diana had keys. She had access, and that realization hit him harder than anything else. "Mr. Harrison," Diana's voice called from the entrance hall, and for the first time he heard a tone of authority in her words that made him pause. "Would you join us in the living room? We have a lot to talk about." William felt a pit form in his stomach as he followed her, his mind struggling to keep up with the events unfolding around him. This wasn't just a confrontation about a missing bracelet. This was something much bigger than he had ever imagined. When he entered the living room, the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. There, sitting comfortably on his expensive Italian leather sofa, were three black women. Women he vaguely recognized from his past. His mind flashed to faces he had fired. Women who had worked for him before, women who had been accused of theft and then dismissed quietly, their reputations destroyed. But now they were here, and they had come for something far more important than a simple apology. Diana walked over to the group, her confidence radiating. She began to introduce the women one by one. "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Johnson, who worked for you 2 years ago, Mrs. Williams, who worked for you 6 months, and Mrs. Davis, who was accused of stealing a ring that later turned up in your wife's car." The blood drained from William's face as the names hit him like a hammer. These were the women he had discarded, the women he had ruined with false accusations. He had treated them like disposable objects, never thinking twice about the consequences of his actions. But now they were here, and they had come for justice, and they weren't alone. The silence in the room was deafening as Diana's calm voice cut through the tension, her words punctuated with a measured, almost practiced precision. William Harrison was frozen, his mind scrambling to piece together the puzzle that had been presented to him. For years he had believed himself untouchable. No one ever challenged him, no one except the woman who had cleaned his house. "Mr. Harrison, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Williams, and Mrs. Davis," Diana continued, her voice cool and collected. "These are the women you accused of stealing, the women whose reputations you destroyed and whose lives you tried to ruin with your lies." William felt a jolt in his chest, a panic rising within him. These women, whom he had long since pushed out of his mind, were back. And they weren't here to beg for forgiveness. They were here to make him face the consequences of his actions. Mrs. Johnson, a woman in her 60s, spoke up first, her voice low but heavy with emotion. "You accused me of stealing $500 from your office. You said I was typical of my people, that I should know my place. I lost my job, my reference, and almost lost my home because no one would hire me. I found the money a week later." William's face flushed red, his heart pounding in his chest. He vaguely remembered the accusation, but he couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye. He had never apologized, never tried to make amends. He had assumed that his wealth and influence were enough to bury the truth, but Mrs. Johnson wasn't. "Finished. You never called me to say you were wrong. You never apologized. You just let me leave in disgrace, never once questioning your own actions." Diana, who had been standing quietly to the side, nodded slightly. "That's the problem, Mr. Harrison. You never questioned yourself. You never thought you would be held accountable for what you did. But today you're going to face the truth." For the first time, William felt a flicker of doubt. His chest tightened as he realized the extent of the mess he was in. This wasn't just about a missing bracelet. It wasn't just about one woman. It was about a pattern, a history of discrimination and cruelty that had been carefully documented and stored away, waiting for this very moment. Diana turned to Mrs. Williams, a woman who looked to be in her 40s. "Mrs. Williams worked for you for 6 months, Diana explained, her voice steady. "But one day she was accused of taking something from your wife's jewelry box. It was a small piece, worth only a few $100s, but you didn't care about the truth. You cared about the power of your accusations. You fired her without so much as a second thought." Mrs. Williams spoke then, her voice quieter than Mrs. Johnson's but no less resolute. "You destroyed my life. You said I had a history of stealing, that I was no different from all the other women you had hired before me. And because of that, no one would hire me. No one would believe me when I said I was innocent. I lost everything." William felt his palms grow clammy. The walls of his mansion, which had once seemed so imposing, now felt like they were closing in on him. He couldn't look at them anymore. He couldn't bear to face the women whose lives he had ruined. Diana's voice broke through his thoughts. "And then there's Mrs. Davis." She gestured to the woman sitting on the couch, a woman who had worked in his house for 4 years. Mrs. Davis was accused of stealing a ring that was later found in your wife's car. The accusation was? A lie, but you fired her anyway, without any regard for the truth. You never called her back. You never gave her a chance to clear her name. Mrs. Davis's voice trembled slightly, but there was fire in her eyes. You don't even know what it cost me to leave your house. You didn't care that I had a family to support. You didn't care that I had a life outside of your mansion. You just tossed me aside like I was nothing. Like I didn't matter. William couldn't respond. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of their accusations was too heavy. His empire, his carefully built reputation, was crumbling in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Diana took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. You've always assumed that people like these women, people like me, are expendable. You've always believed that we don't have the power to fight back, that we don't have the resources to expose you for who you truly are. William clenched his fists, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but it was slipping away. He had always seen himself as a man of power, a man who could buy his way out of any situation. But now, standing in front of him were the people he had wronged, and they weren't here to beg for mercy. They were here for justice. Diana's gaze never wavered. But you were wrong, Mr. Harrison. You were wrong about me. You were wrong about all of us. She turned to the man standing next to her, a lawyer who had been quietly watching the entire exchange. This is Dr. Michael Roberts. He's an attorney specializing in racial discrimination and employment law. For the past 8 months, Dr. Roberts has been working with me to build a case against you. A case based on your history of discrimination, your false accusations, and your attempts to destroy the lives of those you saw as beneath you. Dr. Roberts stood up and extended his hand toward William, but William didn't take it. He couldn't. His mind was racing, but it couldn't keep up with the events unfolding around him. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Roberts began, his tone calm but firm. For 8 months, Diana Thompson has been documenting your actions. She has gathered evidence, recorded conversations, taken photos, and collected statements from women just like the ones in this room. And today you're going to answer for it. William's blood ran cold. His first instinct was to deny it. Oh, to say this was just another attempt to bring him down. But he knew deep down that this wasn't a simple accusation. This was a carefully crafted trap, one that he had walked right into. He tried to gather himself, his mind racing for a way out. I've done nothing wrong, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I've had to protect my property. If things go missing, of course I have to take action. But Diana wasn't having it. She cut him off before he could say another word. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Harrison. You don't see us as people. You see us as objects. And for too long, you've used your position of power to destroy the lives of those you consider inferior. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. William could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about one missing bracelet. This was about everything he had built, a house of cards, teetering on the brink of collapse. Diana glanced at her phone, and her smile widened. Looks like we have company, she said, almost too casually, before William could respond. The doorbell rang once again. And then again and again. The sound echoed through the house, a grim reminder that his world was about to come crashing down. I'm sorry. Mr. Harrison, Diana said, turning toward the door with a confidence that made William feel completely powerless, but our conversation is just getting started. She opened the door, and as the sound of voices filled the room, William realized that he had completely underestimated the woman who had been cleaning his house for the past 8 months. The woman who had been quietly observing, documenting, and waiting for the right moment to expose him. And now, that moment had arrived. As William stood in the center of his own living room, surrounded by the very women he had wronged over the years, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on him. His mind was racing, searching for a way out. But no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he still had control, he knew deep down that this moment was slipping away from him. Diana, standing at the center of it all, was calm, poised, and utterly in control. The very woman he had dismissed for months, the woman he had underestimated, was now the architect of his undoing. She had carefully constructed a case against him, using his own arrogance and prejudice as the foundation. And now, she had brought him to this breaking point. He wanted to shout, to assert his power over them, but the words caught in his throat. He had always been able to manipulate those beneath him, to control them with his wealth, influence, and threats. But these women who had once been invisible to him, were standing tall, united, and unafraid. Diana's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen. A small smile tugged at her lips. Looks like the cavalry is arriving, she said quietly. William didn't understand what she meant at first, but then the doorbell rang, 3 sharp, insistent rings, echoing through the mansion. The sound felt like an executioner's axe, and his stomach dropped. "Mr. Harrison, I'm afraid our conversation is about to get a lot more public," Diana continued, her voice smooth but with a hint of satisfaction. "But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to explain yourself." She motioned for him to follow her, and reluctantly, William did as they walked toward the front door. William's mind raced. Who was outside? What had Diana planned? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He wanted to scream at her, to demand answers. But the sight of the women in the living room, watching him with eyes full of determination, made him hesitant. There was no more room for the man who had always been in charge. Diana opened the door, and William froze. Standing on the doorstep were two detectives, one older, the other younger, both carrying the grim expression of professionals who had seen it all. They flashed their badges, and the older detective spoke first, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "we need to talk to you about some irregularities in your municipal contracts. We have a search warrant." William's heart skipped a beat. A search warrant. He had never imagined this moment would come. His mansion, his empire, was about to be torn apart. He had spent years building his reputation, making connections, playing the game, and now it was all about to come crashing down. The detectives stepped inside, their shoes clicking against the marble floor as they moved toward the living room. William stood frozen, watching them with dread. How had it come to this? He had thought that his connections, his power, could protect him from everything. But now it seemed that everything he had built was unraveling in real time. Diana stood at the door, watching him with quiet satisfaction. "I think this is where you'll want to be, Mr. Harrison," she said softly, her words like a final judgment. William took a step forward, his legs feeling weak beneath him. He was no longer the powerful man he once was. He was a prisoner in his own house, and the weight of that realization was suffocating. The younger detective, who had been silent up until now, took out a folder and handed it to the older one. The papers inside fluttered as the detective opened it and scanned through the contents. William's eyes darted to the documents, but he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. "William Harrison, you're being investigated for tax fraud, bribery, and systematic racial discrimination," the older detective said, his voice cold and unyielding. "We have evidence that you've been using your position to manipulate contracts, bribe city officials, and discriminate against employees based on their race." The words hit William like a punch to the gut. His mind struggled to process the implications of what the detective was saying. Racial discrimination? Bribery? He had always assumed that his status protected him from such accusations. Asterisk. After all, he had always been able to buy his way out of trouble, didn't he? But now, in the face of overwhelming evidence, he realized that money and influence could only shield him for so long. Diana stepped forward, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "We've been documenting your actions for months, all of your crimes, all of your lies, and now the world will know the truth." William's mind was reeling. His arrogance, his belief in his own invincibility, had led him to underestimate Diana. He had thought she was just a maid, a woman beneath his notice. But she had been watching him, listening to his every conversation and taking note of every misstep. She had gathered evidence, built a case, and had exposed him for the corrupt man he truly was. "Diana," William whispered, his voice breaking, "how did you do this? How did you orchestrate all of this?" Diana smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding, of knowing. "Simple, Mr. Harrison," she replied. "You underestimated me. You couldn't see past your own prejudices. You couldn't see me for who I really was. You thought I was just another black maid, invisible to you, easily controlled. But I wasn't, and now you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions." Dr. Michael Roberts, the attorney who had been standing by quietly throughout the entire exchange, stepped forward. "We have records, Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "We have evidence of your corruption, your discriminatory practices, and your abuse of power. And we're going to make sure that everyone knows about it." William's world was collapsing around him. He wanted to deny it all, to fight back, but the truth was undeniable. Diana had won. She had exposed him, and there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. As the detectives moved toward the back of the house, beginning their search, William's phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a series of notifications messages. From business partners, golf buddies, colleagues, all demanding answers. His stomach twisted with dread as he saw that his empire was beginning to crumble in real time. "This is it, isn't it?" William muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Diana didn't answer immediately. She simply walked over to the coffee table, where the pile of documents, recordings, and evidence she had carefully assembled over the past 8 months lay. "I warned you, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly. "You can't keep building your empire on the backs of others without paying the price." William's hands shook as he picked up one of the documents, his eyes scanning the damning evidence. His entire career, his reputation was laid bare before him. He had spent years manipulating people, playing the system, and using his wealth to shield himself from accountability. But now there was nowhere to hide. As Diana stood silently by, watching the detective's work, William felt a sinking sensation deep in his chest. This wasn't just the end of his career. It was the end of everything he had built. The empire he had so carefully constructed, the life he had enjoyed, was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Are you done, Mr. Harrison?" Diana asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "Because this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to come, and I'm just getting started." William looked up at her, his face pale, his eyes filled with disbelief. He had spent his life looking down on people like Diana, dismissing them as insignificant. But now, in this moment, he realized just how wrong he had been. He had underestimated her, and it was the biggest mistake of his life. William Harrison stood frozen, a mere shadow of the man he once was. The world he had built, his empire, his reputation, his sense of invincibility, was crumbling in real time. His mansion, once a symbol of his wealth and power, now felt like a prison. Every room, every corner seemed to close in on him as the weight of his mistakes bore down. The women in the living room, the detectives moving through his house, and Diana standing there with an air of quiet triumph, were all part of the reckoning he had been running from his entire life. His phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another barrage of notifications. Business partners, golf buddies, associates, from the high society he once belonged to. Messages pouring in, questioning what was happening at Harrison Properties, demanding explanations. But there was nothing he could say to make it right. "Mr. Harrison, you've been the architect of your own downfall," Dr. Michael Roberts said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Every piece of evidence we've gathered is a direct result of your actions. Your systemic abuse of power, your racist tactics, your manipulation of contracts and people. It's all right here." He gestured to the piles of documents on the coffee table, all carefully laid out for William to see. "You thought no one would ever challenge you, but now you'll face the consequences." William swallowed hard, his throat dry. The arrogance that had defined him for so many years seemed so small, now so utterly useless. He had believed he could control everything. His wealth, his influence, his power, he had used them to intimidate, to manipulate, to crush anyone who dared to stand in his way. But now, here he was, standing in front of the very people he had wronged, exposed for the fraud he was. Diana, his former maid, the one woman he had so carelessly dismissed as nothing more than a cleaning servant, now stood before him, unbowed and completely in control. She had done what no one else could do. She had broken through the wall of privilege and power he had carefully constructed around himself. She had seen through his lies, observed his every move, and gathered evidence that would bring him to his knees. "What's the matter, Mr. Harrison?" Diana asked, her voice cool, but carrying a subtle undercurrent of triumph. "Not so confident anymore? Not so sure of your power?" William couldn't respond. His mouth was dry, his mind was clouded with a growing sense of panic. He had always believed he could buy his way out of any situation, but now he was facing something far greater than money could solve. The years of manipulating people, of using their fear and desperation to his advantage, had finally caught up with him. He had thought he was untouchable. But now, Diana's unwavering confidence stood as a stark reminder of his own flaws. "And you know what the best part is, Mr. Harrison," Diana continued, her eyes locking with his. "None of this had to happen. None of it. If you had treated people with respect, if you had treated me like a human being instead of a maid, none of this would have been necessary." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she added, "But you couldn't see past your prejudices. You couldn't see that I was more than just a black maid. You saw me as invisible. You never thought someone like me could fight back. But here we are." William's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. But it was too late. The phone vibrated again, and he hesitated before picking it up. It was a message from the secretary. "Urgent, news reporters at the office. They're asking about the recent accusations." His stomach dropped. His worst nightmare was unfolding right in front of him. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it. The reporters would be covering this story, his fall from grace. His empire, which had once been the envy of everyone in his circle, was crumbling to dust, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, the detectives moved from room to room, taking inventory of the documents and photographs Diana had gathered. Every piece of evidence she had meticulously collected over the past 8 months was now being catalogued. Conversations she had overheard, phone calls William had made, photographs of incriminating documents, all of it was being exposed. The older detective turned to Diana. "We're going to need a few more things from you, Miss Thompson." He said, "Your work here has been invaluable. You've documented everything with precision. Now, we're going to ensure that everything is handled according to the law." William's mind raced as the implications of what the detective was saying hit him. The law? What did they mean by that? He couldn't afford to be investigated by the police. His reputation, his wealth, everything depended on the fact that he was always one step ahead. But now, he realized he had been outsmarted, outplayed by someone he had once seen as nothing more than a servant. As the detectives finished their initial sweep of the house, the younger detective turned to William. "Mr. Harrison, we'll be in touch with your lawyer. You've got a lot of explaining to do. And the evidence against you is damning." William felt his knees weaken, and for the first time in his life he understood what it meant to be powerless. He had always thought he was above everyone else. He had used his wealth, his influence, to bend people to his will. But now, in this moment, with the full weight of his wrongdoing staring him in the face, he realized how wrong he had been. Diana's calm voice cut through his thoughts. "You know, Mr. Harrison, you could have made this easy for yourself. You could have treated people like human beings. But you didn't. Now you're going to pay for it." William opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He had no defense. He had spent too many years building a life based on deceit and manipulation. And now everything was falling apart. "Before you go, Mr. Harrison," Diana said, her voice still calm but laced with an authority he hadn't noticed. I want you to understand something. This isn't just about the money. This isn't just about your career. This is about justice. And for the first time in your life, you're going to face it." Diana turned to Dr. Roberts, who nodded in agreement. "You can't buy your way out of this, William. It's over. You'll have to answer for what you've done, and there's no getting out of it." William's mind reeled. The truth was right in front of him, staring him down. All the money, all the power in the world couldn't save him now. His arrogance, his disregard for others, had led him to this moment. And there was no escaping the consequences. As Diana stood tall, watching him with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through him, William realized something that shook him to his core. She had won. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. He wasn't the one who held the power. And that realization, more than anything else, terrified him. William sat in stunned silence, his world crashing down around him. The once proud real estate mogul, who had thought his wealth and connections made him untouchable, now found himself exposed and powerless. Diana Thompson, the woman he had dismissed for months, had turned the tables on him in a way he never saw coming.